Hi guys, welcome to another photo editing tutorial, and in this one we've been sent in this amazing photo from Lee Connell. Thank you very much, Lee. Now, along with the original file, Lee did send me his version that he's edited, and that's it here, and he has said that he feels like it may be a little bit overdone. So he was hoping that through this segment of the channel where I take your photographs and process them in my style, he was wondering what I would come up with. So grab yourself a nice drink, sit back and relax, and let's see what we can do with Luminar AI. Okay, so here we've got Lee's version here, and if you're into strong, vibrant colours, this might be right up your street. And I think this is an important point to remember when you're considering photo editing. When you become the creative force behind the direction of your final output, the final version of your photo, that direction that you take the photo in is very much a subjective one. So for me, I find this too oversaturated. I love the warmth in the yellows and oranges over here, and I love the blue tone, but we've got a lot of kind of green cyan going on here, and there's also a green kind of color cast going on in the sand here as well. And that high vibrancy, high saturation look may be perfect for your photos. I have a couple of friends who run a very successful photography business, and their whole look is built around strong, vibrant colours. And when I look at their work, I really enjoy it. But when I personally process photos, it's not really a direction that I take my work in. So normally I focus on maybe one or two particularly complementary colours to bring out the vibrancy in. So the yellows and oranges here, I may choose to bump those up and I may harmonise that with the blues, but I'm not also going to introduce or enhance the greens, for example. The other thing that I would most definitely do in this file is work on the sand here. It really bugs me when you've got this amazing scenery, a gorgeous tranquil landscape, and you see the evidence of human presence, i.e. footprints. Footprint, little mounds that have obviously at some point maybe been little sandcastles or something that the sea has then washed into little conical hills. I just want that smooth perfection on the sand. And ideally, as a landscape photographer, that would come down to you being in these places and scheduling your trip so that you're there before anyone else. But a lot of the times that's just not the reality for most people. So what we're going to do is see if we can clean up all of these footprints and little mounds here. So if I jump over to Lee's original camera capture, we can see something else that is a huge problem. Now, Lee said to me in his email, I just got myself a new DSLR camera. Now, if this is a new DSLR camera, there's a problem here. If we look up in the sky, we can see all of these little dust spots. And I'm sure at one point or another, you will have come across this yourself. When you see pretty clear skies, you'll start to notice that you get these little spots, and that is just dust on your sensor. The likelihood is that we also have this much dust on the sensor also down here as well, but thankfully down here that's all lost within the detail of the sand. So you'll normally see it up in the sky, but here's the thing, what do you want to do? Do you want to spend half an hour, maybe an hour, retouching every one of these little dots from every single photograph you take? Or do you just want to clean your sensor once and not worry about it? Well, I would recommend you clean your sensor. I've done a video all about how easy it is. It's not a scary thing, and I'll put a link to that in the top right of this video now, and also in the description if you want to go and check that out. It's well worth learning how to clean your own sensor. So far we've talked about things that I would enhance, and they are actually things that we should get right before we're even going out to take a photo, which is clean the sensor. The second thing is actually taking our photo at the right time if we can, so that avoids all of this retouching that's necessary on the beach here. And we haven't even gotten to the more creative aspects of the edit yet. One other thing is that we can also see that there's a slight bowing of the horizon here, and that would just come down to the lens that this was taken with. So we will want to apply Luminar's optics correction, and the other thing we want to do is just straighten this horizon. Just with my eye here, I can see that we are slightly higher on the left hand side where the sun is than here on the right hand side. It is possible that may just be an optical illusion and it may be perfectly straight, but we'll check that out with our crop tool anyway. So let's jump into the edit module and see where we can take this. So before I do anything, I'm going to remove these annoying dust spots from the sky. So I'm going to come to the erase tool. I'm going to hover over my picture, and that will show me the size of my brush, and we're currently at a radius of 20 pixels, and that seems pretty good for this one. And I can just start clicking on these dots. Now I'm just going to zoom in slightly, maybe we'll go to 50%. and I'll hold the spacebar key, and now I can click and drag my photo where I want it. So we'll start in the top right hand corner and go from there. And now you can see that that radius of 20 is a little bit of overkill. So I'm just going to bring that down slightly. Now, this is one way of dealing with your brush size, and you can manually increase or decrease your brush size there. Or what I would actually recommend is while you're actually working, just have your fingers on the left bracket key and the right bracket key, and you can actually increase and decrease just by pressing those keys. And ideally, what you want to do is have your brush just slightly larger than the area that you're wanting to sort out. You don't want Luminar's AI having to do any more calculations than it needs to with this. I mean, we're going to be asking a hell of a lot to try and clean all of this up with one single erase function, but we are going to give it a go. Now I'm going to speed this part of the video up so that you don't need to watch me clicking over all of these sensor spots. Okay, so I think I've got most of the sensor spots. I'm going to click erase and see what Luminar does. I could have gone over the sand and done that at the same time, but I'm not convinced that Luminar's AI is going to do as good a job on the sand as it will with the sky. Getting rid of these should be easy peasy for the AI. Getting rid of it on the sand could be a slightly more complex situation. Now, the more items that you're asking Luminar AI to remove from your photo, the harder you're asking the processor of your computer to work. So don't expect it to do it in the click of a finger. But there you go, that's done that, and you can see that, yeah, all of those dust spots that I clicked over are gone. And see if Luminar's erase tool can do the same thing and get rid of these areas for us as well. And as I say, we really are going to be asking a lot of Luminar to do this, but we might as well give it a go. If it doesn't work, we've got an easy solution, and that is use the clone and stamp tool, which is a more traditional method for stealing from one part of a photo and painting it over another. So there are plenty of smooth areas of sand that we could steal from and paint over, but we're going to try the erase tool just because that's more automated. And I'm doing this all with a mouse at the moment. I normally like to use my Wacom tablet for this sort of thing because it's more intuitive. It's more like just drawing with a pen. Okay, so the erase tool has done a pretty good job, but there are a couple of weirdy little areas going on over here and also in the sea. So I probably should have just left those alone, to be honest. But let's look at our before and our after. For the most part, the sand has been cleaned up pretty well here, but this is good because it gives us an opportunity to look at another tool which gives you a little bit more precise control, and that is in the professional section down here. We've got the clone tool here, and basically what that allows us to do is pick up from one part of the image and paint it over another. So for example, to fix this bit of sand that went a little bit wonky and a bit strange, we can click here to sample from this bit and reduce the size of the brush with the small bracket key, and now we can just paint that straight on over there. And that does not look good at all. So I am going to jump back and explain to you what's happening there. Basically in the center of the image here, it's actually brighter than towards the edges. So if you're picking up from towards the center and painting over there, you're going to end up with a brighter patch, which is what happened just before. So just be wary of that. But to get around that, we can come to our clone stamp tool again, click just below it so that it's of the same value. And now when I click here and paint, that is actually introducing the same tonal value to that area. So that's a better cleanup. And what you can do is reduce the opacity so that you can get a bit of a softer blend going on. So we could steal from this brighter part here now and just paint it over that bit that was a little bit too dark. We could do the same here, paint that over this bit that's a bit dark. We could also increase the opacity back up and maybe paint over this bit that's gone a bit strange here. So click here, I'm going to borrow from there and paint that over that bit there. And we can do the same with the sea as well. We could click here and then just borrow slightly. We're going to make the brush a bit smaller, and yeah, we're too light, we're too bright doing that, aren't we? So, but do you know what? Just so we don't get lost in the minutiae of me spending too long showing you all these tools, I'm just going to not worry about it in this instance, and we're just going to paint this a bit brighter here. We can always use the dodge and burn tool just to darken that area off if we want to. I'm going to use that with a very, very low strength, something like that, and just paint that in there, just so we're getting that reflected kind of darkening shadow from this area here. Guys, I know that is not perfect, but I don't want to waste too much more time diving into that in this video. So let's just look at our before and our after. And I just want to talk really quickly about the ethics of how far you take a cleanup operation of your photos. My personal opinion is that for my photography, I'm trying to present to the viewer something that's beautiful, something that's inviting. I just want my photo to actually look good. I'm not a documentative photographer. I'm not somebody who's taking a photo and saying, hey, this is exactly how life was. This is how things were presented to me right in front of the camera. And a rule around that I found has worked for me quite well is, could this view have happened within reality? And if the answer is yes, I'm happy to go with it. If the answer is no, then I wouldn't do it. So for example, could I have got here and photographed this scene like Lee did, but could I have got there first thing in the morning before anyone had walked on the sand and it was pristine? If the answer is yes, which it is, I have no problems in cleaning the sand up. Could Lee have gone out with a clean sense without dust spots all over it? Of course he could, so let's clean that up. Would I put a waterfall in coming down the side of this mountain here or something, saying, hey, look at this cool waterfall? Well, for the purpose of this photo, absolutely not, because it's just not there in reality, and it probably never is going to be there in reality. However, if I was building a fantasy landscape, then perhaps I would introduce a waterfall over there just to enhance that surreal fantasy landscape vibe. So for example, I really like having a nice clean image, and if that involved just cleaning up some of these wisps of cloud that are just free floating in the sky, they're just kind of like visual chaos in the sky, like you don't need them, and to remove those I would be perfectly happy with it. But anyway, thankfully we've done the hard work now. Now comes the fun part, now comes our edit. Normally I like to work top to bottom. I think that's a really nice workflow. But before I do start going through those tools, the first thing I'm going to do is just turn on the optics, which is auto distortion corrections. And if Luminar has access to your lens profile, which obviously it does here because it changed, it's just going to fix some of that distortion. So the bowing that we were seeing on the actual horizon line here, a lot of that has been corrected, which is great. And now I've got a feeling that if I come into our crop tool, composition tool, if I bring this line down here and actually put it onto the horizon line, we'll see that actually the horizon line is pretty damn straight. If I come over here and across, yep, it's pretty much perfect. The fact that it drops down here, that's actually just the landscape coming towards us. So where I thought I was going to have to do some straightening of the horizon line, in actual fact, it was just an optical illusion and probably enhanced a little further by the fact that the lens distortion was still there in the... So that's actually really good news. We can leave that crop exactly as it is. So one of the tools I like to jump into first with any photo is the Accent AI tool, and just grab that and start cranking that up to the right. And I think that is one of the most powerful AI tools within Luminar AI. And if you are new to photo editing, literally that one slider can do so much for enhancing your photograph that you don't even need to know or do anything else with any of the other tools. And you could say, you know what, I'm done. And you can just ease it to a point where you feel like, yeah, I'm happy with that. It looks kind of natural, still looks good. So this was our before, this is our after. It's an enhancement, but it's subtle. And along those lines, let's leave it there. Now let's jump into our light section. And what we have available to us within our light section and within these expanded views here is predominantly the powerhouse that is behind Lightroom, and that's a raw editor. So that allows us to change things like our exposure, highlights, shadows, blacks and whites, things like that, and also our tone curve. So we can actually do a lot in this drop down box. If you're new to photo editing and this kind of intimidates you, you don't even need to go here. But turns out I've been doing this a while, so I'm going to jump in here and have a little play around. The temperature slider is really great because we could either go to the left and say, hey, let's enhance that kind of evening kind of feel to this photo, or we could say, go to the right and warm things up and have more of a warm, hotter sunrise kind of feel. I'm going to put it somewhere around there because I like what it's doing with the blue hues in that. Lee has actually got his exposure really good here, so I don't think we need to do too much with our exposure. But what I encourage you to do is actually just grab the sliders, particularly things like the exposure. If I take that all the way to the right, I'm going to completely blow this photo out, but I'm not too worried. What I'm looking at is do we have any detail in those deep shadows? And the answer is yes, we do. So I know if we're using certain tools in Luminar, we actually have detail here to bring back. And if I do the same but go in the opposite direction and bring the highlights down here by dropping the exposure, I can see that we still have detail in the sun and the brightest bits of the cloud. So that's actually really good news to know that we have the full gamut of dynamic range from our highlights to our shadows. We could grab the smart contrast and just have a little play with that. But what I'm not really liking with this is as I boost it up, we're actually darkening and mottling down the sand. But I do quite like what it's doing with the clouds. It's certainly adding a bit of interest there. So let's just add a tiny bit of smart contrast. I feel like the highlights are pretty good here, so we'll move on to the shadows, and by pushing these to the right, I'm hoping we can get a little bit more interest going on in these hills here, and we certainly can do that when I push that up. Now I feel like we've got a good spread of information from our blacks to our whites, but what I might do is just drop the blacks ever so slightly and just start boosting the whites. And if I do that, you'll actually see in this histogram here, the white points are over on the right hand side here, and we do have some information just in this tiny bit of the histogram. So I don't really want to lose that, but if I push this to the right, you'll see that our histogram suddenly shuffles over to the right and gives us a little bit more brightness through here. But I feel like we're just bleaching out a little bit too much through the yellows of the sun. So let's just drop that back, but put a little bit in. Now let's just have a quick check before and after so we can see where we've come from and where we've got to. And while we're at it, we'll have a quick jump over to Lee's version and see what he did with it. And there you can see we've definitely got a very greeny hue going on through this photo. So we'll jump back to mine here. And I think you'll agree that our color palette and tones are much more natural in this photo at the moment. That's not to say that that's the right edit. You may prefer Lee's edit at the moment, but this is just the way that I'm taking this photograph, and that's absolutely fine. And the fact that different aesthetics appeal to different people and we prefer different things, that's a good thing. This is just the way that I'm going to process this. And the funny thing is, on another day, I may process this slightly differently as well. Okay, I'm going to jump into the Structure AI tool. And what I'm wanting to do here is actually bring out some structure and detail within this landscape form here, these hills over on the right hand side. So I'm going to grab the amount slider and start cranking that up. And as I do that, you can see all of that information here. Now don't get freaked out by the photo as a whole, because I appreciate that looks pretty gnarly and pretty ugly. I'm just focusing on this area here and I'm thinking, does that introduce a bit of interest, a bit of structure and clarity? Let's turn it off and turn it on, and I think we can safely say yes, it's certainly bringing out some detail here. Do I want it at 100%? No, not really. So I'm just going to ease this back to a point where I feel like at its strongest, that's how far I want it. I don't want to take it any further than that. But now what I'm going to do, this is the really great thing, we can use a custom mask on this Structure AI tool, and that's exactly what I'm going to do now. I'm going to paint this in, and I'm going to do it with full opacity to start with over this landmass, just so that we can see this effect, and then I can reduce it from areas if I want to. So now we've got the benefit of Structure AI, and it's just over this landmass only. So if I turn that off and I turn it on, we can see all of that lovely detail going on there. I feel that it's introduced a little bit too much green through this sort of area here. So I'm just going to get my eraser tool and I'm just going to paint away that mask, but I'm not going to paint it away completely. I'm just going to drop this down to like 33. So basically I'm reducing that by a third. So let's just paint that through there. And straight away when I let go, you saw that that just reduced that effect. And let's have one more sweep. And I might just go around the edge here, just to make sure that it's not affecting the sky too much. Now earlier I mentioned when I'm working with colour, I like to have a colour balance, two colours working in harmony. And here we have the yellow orange and we have a lot of blue. Green, you don't play a part in this, my friend. So let's jump into colour. And if we come to the HSL, which stands for hue, saturation and luminance, and we drop that down, we have access to control any one of those items. So I could come in and talk specifically to the oranges over here. So for example, if I wanted to take them more towards a yellow, I can grab that slider and push it all the way over there. Obviously that's not really what I want to do, but rather than this yellow area in the middle here, I may want to harmonize that more with the oranges that are surrounding it. So I may want to just take that more towards the orange. The greens that we have appearing here in this landmass over here, I find that a little distracting. So we've got a few options. We could either try and tie it in with the rest of the photo. So take the greeny cyans and push them more towards a blue so that they harmonize more with the sea and the sky. And I think that's what we'll do in this instance. And if I turn the color adjustments off and then turn them back on, it's very subtle, but we've taken that green effect there, that green tinge, and just knocked it back slightly. Another option that we have is actually just jumping into the saturation itself and coming into those greens and cyans where most of that color is and just reducing that down. And hopefully, yeah, as we drop the cyans, we're safe. I thought we may have lost some of the color from the sky and the sea here, but thankfully they do all exist in the blues, as you can see by me taking that away. If we want to increase the blues, just so that we're getting a little bit more vibrancy in that color, we can do that too. And if we wanted to play with the actual hue itself of the blue, we can come in here and we can send it more towards a purple hue as I push it to the right, or we can send it more towards a cyan. I do want to just push it into the teal just ever so slightly. And now if we turn that off and turn it on, it's very subtle. I can see it on my monitor, and I would recommend, if you're serious about getting into photo editing, you really want to get yourself a color accurate monitor. I'm using an ISO monitor, and they're widely regarded as the best in the industry. They're used in medical imaging, high-end photo editing, all of that stuff. They are very expensive. But if you do a little bit of research on Dr. Google, you should be able to find yourself an entry-level color accurate monitor. Anyway, let's move on. There's a couple of tools I want to visit before we get into the creative section, and the first one of those is landscape. I'm going to jump in here, and again I'm going to push this all the way to 100 so you can see exactly what this slider is doing. So our dehaze slider pushed to 100 creates a pretty gnarly result. It's pretty ugly, but you can see some things that it is doing. It's enhancing that orange yellow look over there by the sun. So if I take that away and then put it back on again, you can see that that's really bringing up a lot of vibrancy through there. It's introducing a bit of a weird color cast here through the sky, so we'd certainly want to avoid it there. But we may be able to leverage this tool and just a little bit through this area here. So I'm going to crank the dehaze amount up somewhere around that 40 mark. And again, I'm going to use my mask on this. So I could paint this in over this area here, or what I'm going to do here is actually grab a radial mask, and I'm going to click to drag a circle. And in this case, we've actually got the opposite going on of what we wanted. So what we want to do is actually invert this mask by clicking on that icon there. And if I switch between the two, you can see here we've got the dehaze effect going on outside of the circle and then feathering in towards the middle, and we've got 0 amount here, but we want to switch it round. So clicking that now gives us 100% of whatever the effect is that we applied here, which was 41 on dehaze, nothing else yet, but that's all going on right there at full whack. Then from here to the outside perimeter of this circle, we have got a gradient fall off. So from 100% of our effect in the middle, it feathers off to 0 at this point. So outside of this circle, we've got none of this effect here. Somewhere in the middle, we'd have about 50%. And from here inside, we've got 100%. And if I click on the mask here, you can actually see how it's affecting it, and you can actually see that feather. If I grab this point and pull it in, we can actually change the shape of this to more of an oval, and then we can rotate it. And what I'm trying to do here is just create a nice little oval that we can put over our sun that then just feathers off from there. So if I turn this off and on, off and on, it's just enhancing that orange just through that area there, and that's quite nice. I'm also going to introduce a little vignette as well. So I'm just going to choose my subject, that being the sun, because that's going to be my brightest point. And I really like this feature in Luminar AI because normally your vignette will work from the center of your frame outwards, but you can actually specify that I want this to be my brightest point and then make everything else darker. So now if I start reducing the amount, you can see that around the edges it gets darker and this remains our bright point. We can change the size of it and bring it in tighter or take it further out. And with just these two sliders, we don't have the hugest amount of control. So drop your advanced settings down here. And within this, I find feather is the most useful, because by increasing our feather, that's what's actually going to soften that gradient between where we have none of the effect and the full darkening around the edge. We could play with the roundness if we wanted to see how that's going to affect it. And we can see the look of it there, and then we can just ease the amount back to where we feel that it's just darkening those edges off just a little bit, but doing it in a more subtle way. So if I turn that off and I turn it on, it's just darkening this area and just helps to bring our attention more towards the sun over here. To be honest, I'm not sure we even need that in this photo, but we're just going to leave that for now and move on. So we could do a sky replacement if we wanted to with a reflection, but I don't think we need to. I think this is a really nice sunset we've got going on here, and if you don't need to change it, why would you? So we're going to leave that exactly alone. We could use some of the augmented sky features, for example. So if you wanted to drop some birds into the scene like that, you could do that and then just drop the amount back to a point where they actually fade into the scene a little bit more believably. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this particular tool, and it's not something I ever really use. So I'm just going to turn that off, but I'm just showing you that that option is there. Again, we talked about fantasy stuff before with a waterfall. You could add a planet if you wanted to do a fantasy scene. Just while we're demoing different tools, look, let's throw some fog in. In fact, let's do some layered fog, because that's going to just look as if the mist's just sitting on the sea here. And we're just going to increase the depth to 100. And now I'm going to grab the amount and start bringing that up, and we should be getting some layered fog coming in from across the sea. So if I take the fog back, and I'm going to bring the amount of that layered fog up, and we'll start to see that. Now I'm noticing at the moment when I'm moving my sliders that there's a slight lag that I don't normally experience, and I'll tell you the reason for that. So if I click, for example, just quickly on 100% here, there was a quite a lag before, just a second before that actually popped and showed me what that looked like. I'm not used to that. Normally my computer responds really quickly to Luminar AI, but I appreciate that's not the case for everybody. And that is because when we're dealing with AI, we're actually asking a lot of the processor. And the more of these tools that we add to our image, they're compounding one on top of the other on top of the other. And so every new tool that you add is having to adapt and integrate with every other tool and edit that's gone before it. So that the more you do, the more you're asking of your processor, and the more time it might take for it to respond. And so the reason I'm experiencing these lags at the moment is that the hard drive that I have Luminar AI installed on, it is absolutely full. I've got a 1 terabyte M.2 SSD, which is currently the fastest kind of SSD that you can actually get for me to install my software onto. But because it is so full, there's no breathing room or free memory on that drive for Luminar to work with. And so everything's just struggling a little bit. So I'm going to clear out my hard drive after this video, and I'm pretty confident once I've done that, that my speed will return to normal in Luminar. I have had a few people asking about upgrading their computers, their laptops, things like that. I built my own computer 2 years ago. It's a system that's still working exceptionally well for the most part. So if you'd actually like some advice on what sort of components make a good PC today, just write PC advice in the comments below, and if enough people request it, I'll look at making a video to help you guys upgrade and get the most out of your computer for your photo editing. Because when you have a fast computer, it's a joy to use. When you have a slow computer, you just want to tear your hair out. So that could well be a video of use to you guys. But yeah, let me know in the comments. Okay, my layered fog. How are we doing here? Sorry, I digress slightly. I'm just going to drop the amount back a little bit. Now, while I'm not completely sold that this is fog rolling in, I actually do quite like it, because if I turn it off and then I turn it on, it's actually doing me a favor of brightening the sand up here. And that's an example of sometimes how you can actually use Luminar's tools in a more creative way. You don't just need to take it for what it's called, atmosphere AI, and think, oh, I don't want any atmosphere or fog, I'll leave that. You'll recall we also used the dehaze slider in a way that you wouldn't think it would normally be used to actually enhance the vibrancy of the sunrise or sunset. I'm not sure which it is. So I think the takeaway from that is just dive into the tools, have a play around. You're not going to break anything. Okay, let's move into glow, because the autumn effect was something that Lee said he was quite interested in, and that's where this resides now. So it's actually moved from previous versions of Luminar. So if you want to try the autumn effect, just click that and then just crank the amount up. Let's go all the way to 100 so we can see what it's doing. Okay, it's sent our photo nuclear. Let's just ease that way back. So the autumn effect became quite popular within landscape photography, and the idea of it is to create this almost ethereal, dreamlike quality to your photos. So if I turn that off and then I turn it on, you can see that it's certainly doing that, but it's also brightening the photo as well. If I come down to Auto Effect Soft, let's give that a try. And I feel like that's adding a nice sort of tranquil look to the photo. If we look at our before, it's kind of dark and moody. If I turn it on, it's certainly softening everything up. But I'm not a big fan of the Auto Effect, so I'm going to actually turn that off and reset it. What I prefer to do for a similar effect, but one that I prefer, is use the Mystical tool. And if I crank the amount of that up, you'll see that we're getting a softening of the photo, kind of similar to what we were getting in the Auto Effect, but it's not actually increasing the exposure value. We're not brightening things up. So the actual brightness of the photo is actually staying very constant, but it is just softening the photo. I would never be using it as 100%. This is far too much, but whenever you start working with any tool, what I recommend doing is just grab the slider and push it to 100%. Just so you get a feel for what is the effect, what is this going to do to my photo? And then when you kind of understand, okay, well, this is without it, turn it on, this is with it, okay, I see what it's doing, now I can just ease that back to a point where I'm happy with it. So maybe just something subtle around the 25 mark might be appropriate for this. Now we're going to jump into another one of my favorite tools, which is the mood tool. And we can choose a lookup table here, comes straight from the movie industry, great way to color grade your photos. And I particularly like Long Beach. You can have a play around with any of these if you want, just to see what it's doing to your photo. And again, what you might want to do is rather than have the amount to 30, just crank that all the way to 100. And then as you go through these, you can see exactly what that effect will do to your photo. So for example, if we wanted more of a purpley blue look to the photo, we might go for San Diego. We know what it's doing to the photo, but we may just want to go with that amount that it's set to as default, around 30. If we turn that off and turn that on, you can see that we've kind of harmonized the whole color palette towards that blue tonality. And so if that's the look you're going for, go with that. For this one, I think I'm going to go with Long Beach. I really like Long Beach. I find it helps to enhance the oranges and the blues. So let's go for that. Now I could say, yep, I'm happy with that, done there. Or what I could do is take things just one step further, and I am going to show you that because a lot of people on the last video said, wow, I really enjoyed learning about local masking. And so let's look at local masking again, just to reinforce that, because it is an absolute powerhouse with inside Luminar AI. It's so useful. So what we can do is actually control specific areas of the photo. So if you've got problem areas, you can solve them. So for example, I could brighten up just the landmass here that's gone very dark on us. I love the blue that we have in the sky up here, but it's kind of missing over here. It's too bright in my opinion over there compared to the right hand side of the photo. I also feel like the sand here is just almost one uniform mass in the photo, and I'd like to add a little bit more interest to the sand here, maybe just brighten it up slightly. And we could also try looking at just adding a little bit more drama into the clouds over here as well. So each one of those things we can tackle one at a time. So let's do that. Let's add a new basic mask, and I think the first thing we'll do is deal with the sand. So we might want to bring the warmth of the sand up. I'll grab the exposure and bring the brightness level of that up. If I add more contrast to it, you're going to see that things start getting a little bit more grungy and a lot more texture, and that's not actually what I want. I want a nice smooth looking sand. I'm going to grab the saturation slider and just see what color this pushes and brings out. It's going to go a little bit more orange, but unfortunately in the shadows it's bringing out a bit of a weird cyan look over there, so I don't really want that. So I'll drop it back down, and maybe the warmth, we just want to ease that off. We might have taken that just a little bit too far. And the fact that the rest of the photo looks really weird right now, I'm not worried. When I'm making these local adjustments and local masks, I'm just looking visually at the area that I'm going to be applying it to, and that's the sand in this case. One way around that would be to paint your mask in first and then start making the adjustments. I do it equally one way, sometimes the other way. But in this case, we've made our adjustments first. I'm now going to get my brush and I'm going to start painting that in, and I'm happy with doing a low opacity for this, so 30%. And I'm just going to click once here and drag all the way from the left over to the right and then let go. You'll see that we've just brightened up this little patch of sand through here. Okay, let's see if we can just darken this little bit of the sky up here so it kind of matches a little bit better over here on the right hand side. So we're going to add another basic local mask. This time I'm going to do it the other way around. I'm actually going to paint that in, but rather than paint, I'm going to just use my gradient mask, which allows me just to draw a line down from the top to the bottom, and you can see how that's nicely feathered in from that full intensity at the top to the bottom. But obviously nothing's changing in our photo because we haven't made any adjustments yet. So now I can come in here and I can grab the exposure and start taking that to the left. And that's going to darken off this left-hand side of the sky over here. It's also starting to darken down these clouds quite considerably, and that just might be a little bit too much. So why don't I ease the exposure back a smidge and grab the highlights, because that's just going to talk to the highlights of the photo and not those dark shadows that we have here. And if we're concerned with those, what we can do is actually grab the shadow slider and boost that up. We can make sure that we're adhering more to the blue color palette that we have over here just by grabbing the warmth and just dropping that down into the blues slightly. And the great thing with these gradient masks is you're not just stuck to a gradient from 100%, 50, 0, going through in a nice linear pattern like that, which sometimes serves the purpose just fine. But what you can also do is come to the paint mask, come to the erase tool, and if you want, so over on the right hand side where we've already got a dark blue, we might not want it over there, so we can just erase it. And we're creating a kind of brightness sandwich. And bear with me while I just explain that to you, because it's actually a really powerful kind of concept, and I've used it in heaps of my work before. Your viewer's eye goes to the brightest part of the image, and you can use that piece of information to help control the viewer's eye. So if we have a bright part in the top left-hand corner, the viewer's eye can almost go up to that top left and disappear out of the frame. What you want to do is actually control and contain the viewer's eye within your photo. So by creating a darker top edge and a darker bottom edge, and you can certainly see that this bit is darker than the sand here, you're trying to keep the viewer's eye more successfully in the center of your frame. And that's what I want to do here. Lee's captured this beautiful sunset, all this interesting cloud, the sea. That's where our eye should be, right? Not disappearing off at the top of the frame or even lingering too long on the sand in the foreground. So let's just make a couple more quick local masking edits. We'll add another basic mask, and I'm going to deal to this area here. So we're going to boost the shadows. And rather than using my slider this time, I'm literally just clicking, because as I mentioned before, my machine's struggling a little bit at the moment just because it's got hardly any available space to work with at the moment. So I'm going to increase the exposure slightly. And if I'm painting this in here, the chances are I'm going to get a little bit of a halo around the edge of this, and I don't want that. So I'm going to bring the highlights and drop that down just so that that bright edge isn't really showing up. We can also increase the structure AI, because if you remember, that worked quite well to bring out detail last time as well. That's far too much, but let's just ease it off a little bit. We'll grab our paintbrush, because that's certainly the tool for the job here, and let's click and start painting. And if I wasn't making a video, I would be doing this very, very accurately, or trying to do it as accurately as I could, but just in the name of speed, I'm just literally going to paint this in pretty rough and ready. Let's have a little bit down there. Drop the opacity slightly, and this time I am going to go over the edge. And if you make your brush big enough, you can make that feathering a little more believable. But if you go over the sea here, I think that's just introduced a little bit of weirdness. So we'll grab the erase tool, crank it to 100%, and we just need a nice straight line across the bottom here to get rid of that. Okay, if I turn that off and I turn it on, let's have a look. That's off, very dark, very black masses there. And then it comes on, and we can see that we have a bit of detail. I'm not really a fan of how this bit here is much brighter than this on the left, and we could sort that out by just painting that away slightly. We could get a low opacity, something around that 39%. But in this instance, I'm just going to leave it exactly as it is for this demonstration. I think this video is getting on the long side now. I know I lose a lot of people along the way, but if you are still with me, right, still here in the comments, and kudos to you, I salute you. And let's just do our last edit here. We're just going to bring up the exposure and add a little bit more structure in those clouds as well, perhaps. We don't need it that bright. protect my highlights because I don't want to blow things out too much. And now I'm going to use a radial mask to add that just along the horizon, just where those clouds are. So let's grab our radial mask. First of all, we're going to have to draw a circle, and that's fine. Don't draw it too big because we want to be able to grab these handles here. We want to affect the opposite of what it's done so far. So invert that mask with that button there. And now let's grab and shape this. So we pull it in first of all, and now we're going to rotate it. Now I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger, and that's certainly brightening up the horizon there. Perhaps a little bit too much, so we'll just ease these off just ever so slightly. So now let's have a look at where we've come from and where we've got to. So this is where we started from with all of the spots in the sky. We've got a lot of visual mess in the sand in the foreground, and things are looking a little bit washed out. I'm sure if you were stood here like Lee would have been, this would have looked a lot more saturated. When you're taking an image straight from the sensor, it's not going to have the same level of color saturation that our eyes can see in person. So that's up to us as photo editors to bring it back if we want to. So where have we got to? This is where we've ended up with the edit that I've done this time. Here's a funny thing. When I'm recording my videos for you and I'm doing the photo edits, there are a couple of peculiarities. One would be I'm a lot more heavy-handed with the edit when I'm working for you guys, predominantly just so you can actually see what's going on and actually see the changes that I'm making, and they're not too subtle to actually pick up on the video. But the second thing is I don't always make the best decisions right in real time when I'm recording this. And when I get to the end, I often think, I wouldn't have done that so heavily, or I would have changed that. But this is one of the good things with Luminar AI is if you have taken things too far, which I certainly have, and I know that I've taken this too far, a little bit like Lee did with his original edit, if we look at that, it's just got that feeling of being a little bit overbaked. But if we jump back to mine, I also feel like this is just a little bit overcooked. So what we can do is come down to the bottom right hand slider here, and this is just so cool. I love this. Basically, we can take away our whole edit by increments that we feel happy with. So this takes us back to our very base. So the only thing that's still visible here is the retouching, and you still want that 100% because you don't want to see a kind of half footprint. You want it all gone or all there. So anyway, it's all gone, and I like that. But this is our original kind of washed out version. And if I crank it all the way to 100, this is our more saturated, perhaps a little too contrasty version. But we might say, you know what, I like what I've done, but I don't like it at 100%. And you can start easing it back to a place where you feel happy with that edit. So I'm probably sat somewhere around that 55-60% mark. So if we turn this off and we turn it on, that's a more subtle edit, and it's also probably a more realistic edit. Let's look at our before and after with a side-by-side slider, and I certainly think that we've enhanced this photograph, and hopefully we haven't taken it too far. One of my favorite things is the removal of all those footprints in the sand. I much prefer our version on the right for that point of view. And if we look at our before and after with the eyeball tool, before, after, yeah, I'm happy with that. And if we compare that to Lee's original version that he edited, in my opinion, I feel like the colors here are quite crude, and I'm not really enjoying the green color cast as I mentioned before. So hopefully Lee approves of the edit that we created. If you feel like you got some value out of this today, please do me a favor, just leave me a thumbs up, and a little comment really goes a long way. If you like the look of Luminar and think it would be a good photo editor for you, I've got a link below with a discount code at Sky10, and you're welcome to save yourself a little bit of money at the checkout. Thanks so much, guys. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video.